Welcome back to the Self-Discovery Files. I want to start episode 20 off a little slower because this isn't one of those episodes where I come in super fired up and tell you to just go all in or whatever people like to say. This one might be a little more uncomfortable than that. Lately, I've had this realization that kind of shook me a little bit and honestly made me a little overwhelmed. Not in like a crash out way, just in that quiet kind of sitting with it way. And I've been building my own business that is based around sales. Okay, with frameworks, scripts, and just whole education, all of it. And I'm good at it. I can understand it. I teach it and I can break it down. I can analyze calls and I can explain psychology behind it. And I can coach someone through hesitation on a close. But at some point, I had to sit there and ask myself something I didn't want to ask. Why does this feel heavy in a way that doesn't match who I actually am? Not heavy because it's hard. Hard is fine. Hard is good. I can handle hard pretty well, actually. I actually like doing hard stuff. But heavy, like I'm trying to live in a house that technically fits, but it doesn't feel like home. And that's a weird thing to admit when you've already invested time into something, when you've talked about it publicly, when you've told people this is what I'm building, this is what I'm doing, because now it's not just about the work, it's about ego. It's about the image that you've already created. It's about not wanting to look inconsistent. It's about not wanting to look like you changed your mind. And that's where a lot of people get trapped. You don't stay in the lane because it's right. You stay because you've already told people you're in it. And I had to sit with that. And I started thinking about how many people do this in their own lives. You pick something because it sounds strong or impressive or profitable or respected, or it just feels like momentum and like you're going in the right direction, or you see other people doing it. And once you're in it, you don't stop to ask if it actually matches you. You just keep moving because movement feels better than uncertainty. But here's the part nobody will talk about. You can build momentum in the wrong direction. You can get discipline in the wrong direction, and you can become consistent in something that isn't meant for you. And the scariest part of it all is you can get good at it. That's what makes it confusing. If you were terrible at it, you'd quit. If it was obviously wrong, you'd pivot. But when you're capable, when you can make it work, when people validate it, now you're stuck in something that's like working, quote unquote, but it doesn't feel aligned. And that's where I found myself lately. Not failing, not collapsing, not unmotivated at all. Just super aware. Aware that something felt super, or not even super, but just slightly off. And most people ignore that feeling. They tell themselves, every path feels heavy. This is just what discipline feels like. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes it's not resistance, it's misalignment. And those two feel similar on the surface, but they are completely different underneath. Okay, resistance says this is hard. All right, but misalignment says this isn't me. And if you don't know the difference, you'll fight yourself for years. And I don't think this is just about business either. I think this is about how people choose careers, how they choose relationships, how they choose goals, how they choose their own identities. They don't start with who am I really? They start with what looks like progress. And that's how you wake up 3 years into something and feel super tired in a way that you can't fix from sleep. So this episode isn't about quitting everything. It's not about being impulsive or chasing feelings or escaping feelings, but rather about learning how to recognize when you're forcing yourself into a lane or something that doesn't actually fit your nature. Because if you don't pause and examine that, you're going to spend your whole life trying to outperform a version of yourself that was never meant to exist in the first place. So I want to go deeper and break down why it's so easy to convince yourself that you're on purpose when you're really just reacting. Okay, so let me break this down really quick. Nobody wakes up and says, I think I'll build a life that doesn't fit me. Right? Nobody will ever make that conscious decision. It's slower than that. Okay, you start by looking around. You see what works. You see what makes money and what gets respect. You see what other people are praised for. And without realizing it, you start absorbing that as the blueprint. It's super subtle. Maybe you're 19 or 20 and everyone's talking about e-commerce or trading or fitness or content or whatever it is, and you're thinking, okay, that seems like a lane, that seems like something, and because you don't fully know yourself yet, you borrow a direction. Most people don't choose from clarity, they choose from exposure. And so you get exposed to something that looks powerful and you step into it. And at first it feels right because movement feels good, learning feels good, that early progress feels good, and you feel like you're finally doing something. But here's where it gets deeper. When you're young or even just uncertain, you don't just want income, you want identity. You want something to say when someone asks, "So what are you doing right now?" You want something that sounds solid, so you pick a lane that gives you an answer. Not necessarily because it's you, but because it fills that silence, it fills that gap. And once you start moving that direction, the reinforcement kicks in. You get better. You get small wins. People compliment it. You start talking about it more. Now your identity is tied to it. Now backing out doesn't just feel like changing a direction, it feels like losing a piece of yourself. And this is where things get messy because now your ego is protecting something that might not even be aligned. You tell yourself, I've already put time into this. I don't want to look scattered. I can't just pivot. I don't want to look like I'm uncommittal, or that I just don't keep my word. Maybe I just need to push harder. And sometimes, yeah, pushing harder works, but sometimes that just buries the quiet voice inside of you that's saying, this isn't it. And that voice isn't super loud. It doesn't sabotage you. It just makes everything feel slightly off. But you still show up. You still execute. You still build. But there's a tension underneath it. And whether you realize it or not, you can feel it. It's like you're trying to convince yourself this is your calling instead of feeling it naturally. And that tension that you feel is super important because it's not laziness. It's not fear. It's not lack of discipline. But it's your nature rubbing against a structure that doesn't fully match it. Okay, think about it like this. If you're naturally a reflective or thoughtful, analytical person, and you try to force yourself into something that's hyper aggressive and transactional, you might be able to perform it, but it's going to cost you more energy than it should. And if you're naturally expressive and creative and you trap yourself into something rigid and super numbers focused and heavy, you might succeed, but you'll feel drained in a way that doesn't even make sense to you. And you won't know the difference at first, which is the hard part because growth is uncomfortable. Building anything meaningful is uncomfortable. Skill development is uncomfortable. So, how do you know if you're growing through resistance or grinding against misalignment? That's where most people get stuck, including me. I got stuck there very recently. And people get stuck there because they confuse exhaustion with effort, or tension with the ambition that they have, or they confuse identity with the momentum that they build. And the longer that you ignore that confusion between those, the more invested you become in a version of yourself that might not even be aligned or real. It's not fake, but it's just constructed and built from influence instead of introspection. And so when you finally pause, like really pause, you start realizing you didn't actually choose this from the inside out. You chose it from the outside in. And that singular realization can feel like groundbreaking destabilizing because now you have to ask, if this isn't fully me, then who am I actually? And that question is super uncomfortable because it requires you to slow down instead of speed up. And that feels like falling behind. All right. And so that's kind of where I want to go next, which the fear of being behind and how it pressures you into forcing a lane just to keep up is super relevant. Because let's talk about what really drives this. It's not ambition, it's not clarity, it's fear. The fear of being behind. And that fear is super loud. You scroll, especially nowadays with the access to social media and everything just being idolized on the internet, everyone just posting their lives like it's a highlight reel. You scroll and you see someone your age making money or something, building something fast, announcing a launch, posting wins. I mean, there's so many young people that are in their early 20s, maybe even teenage years, that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, young people just doing crazy things. And even if you don't consciously compare, your nervous system does. And it says we need to move. not necessarily in the right direction, but just forward. It creates urgency because standing still feels dangerous. And here's what's wild: the fear of being behind will make you commit to something you don't even love just so you don't feel stagnant. Because you don't pause long enough to ask, is this actually mine? Is this aligned with me? Is this who I am? Do I want this to represent me? And instead you ask, is this fast enough? Or something of that similar sort. And there's a huge difference. When you're scared of being behind, you prioritize speed over alignment. You choose a lane because it's monetizable, or it's trendy, or someone you respect is doing it, because it seems scalable. And those aren't bad things. But if that's the only reason you're choosing it, you're building from anxiety. And anxiety builds shaky foundations. It builds urgency without any direction. And when you're building from that place, everything feels like a race. You just try to survive that process. You don't really enjoy it. And the hard truth is, a lot of people aren't chasing purpose. They're running from the feeling of being left behind, and that's different. Purpose feels steady, and it feels quiet, but it's super strong. It feels like something you'd still lean toward even if nobody was watching. But fear feels frantic. It feels urgent. It feels like I need to make something happen immediately, like right now. And when I look at myself honestly, I can see how much of my drive was clean and how much of it was fear. Not fear of failure, but rather fear of being average, fear of wasting time, fear of looking like I didn't have direction, fear of watching other people move while I stayed still. And fear is a super powerful motivator, one of the most powerful motivators. It will get you to work. It'll get you disciplined. It'll get you consistent, but it won't necessarily get you aligned. And that's the trap. Because you can build something impressive out of fear. You can grind hard out of fear. You can become skilled out of fear. I mean, I guarantee you've heard of somebody that spends their whole life studying something, going into a career field, and going through that grind because, they think that they're going to like it, but then they end up not liking it and they've spent 10 to 15 years in it. Eventually, you're going to feel the cost, even if you grind. Because fear burns hot, and hot burns out, but alignment burns steady. You don't have to convince yourself every morning. You don't have to hype yourself up. You don't have to constantly resell yourself on the path. There's a pull towards it. There's an innate pull towards it, even when it's hard, and that's what I started noticing. When I imagined continuing in this exact lane long term, I didn't feel aligned, or I didn't feel grounded. I felt like I was convincing myself. And convincing yourself long term is exhausting. It's different from choosing. Okay? Choosing feels clean, but convincing, it feels super tense. It's like this cognitive dissonance. And if you don't separate those two, you'll spend years performing conviction instead of actually having it. So the real question becomes, how do you tell the difference between discomfort that means growth and discomfort that means you're forcing something that doesn't fit? And this is where it gets super subtle, because if you get this wrong, you'll either sabotage yourself or trap yourself. Okay, there are two very different kinds of discomfort. One is resistance and one is misalignment. On the surface, they feel almost identical. Both are uncomfortable. Both will make you question yourself. Both will make you tired. But underneath, they come from different places. Resistance shows up when you are growing. It happens when you're stretching into something that actually fits you, but you're not used to that level yet. It feels like friction because you're expanding. Think about learning to speak on camera for the first time, or learning to ride a bike for the first time, or going to the gym after months off. You feel awkward. You feel like exposed and super unsure. But there's also like a quiet excitement underneath it, a sense of like, this is scary, but I know this is good for me. And you might dread the action, but once you're in it, you feel engaged. And after it's done, you feel stronger. That's resistance. It protects your comfort zone, but it doesn't fight your nature. Now, misalignment is different. It's not about stretching. It's about bending. And when you're misaligned, you don't just feel challenged, you feel like slightly wrong in the environment. Okay, you can still perform, you can still succeed, but there's a background drain. You don't feel more like yourself after doing the work. You feel disconnected, like very slightly. Maybe it's a little bit more, but and that's more obvious, but in most cases it's just slightly disconnected. And here's a simple way to think about it. Resistance usually feels like I don't want to do this, but I know I should. And misalignment feels like I can do this, but something about this doesn't sit right. And when you have resistance, that will fade with repetition. But misalignment will deepen with repetition. That's the key. If you keep doing something aligned with you, even if it's hard, you'll slowly feel more natural in it. Your confidence builds, your energy stabilizes. You start thinking about it even when you're not working on it. But when you keep doing something misaligned, you get technically better, but you feel more detached. You start negotiating with yourself. You need more external motivation. You fantasize about something else while building the current thing. And that here's where thinking matters, okay? You can't just go off emotion in the moment because sometimes you'll wake up tired and assume that means misalignment. That's just lazy thinking. You have to zoom out. Ask yourself this. If nobody clapped for this, if it made money slower than expected, if it wasn't impressive, would I still feel drawn to mastering this? And that question is uncomfortable because sometimes the honest answer is no. And if the answer is no, that doesn't mean that you quit immediately, but it means that you examine why you started. Was it genuine curiosity or was it status, security, validation, momentum? There's nothing wrong with wanting money. There's nothing wrong with wanting respect or any other virtue that you can start for. But if those are the only pillars holding up the structure will always feel unstable. You'll constantly need proof that you're on the right path. Alignment, that doesn't need constant proof. It just needs patience. And patience feels like falling behind if you're comparing yourself all the time. That's why so many people stay in resistance mode forever. They'd rather grind in something that works than sit still long enough to ask, does this actually fit me? And sitting still is terrifying when you're ambitious. I I can tell you that 100 times over because stillness feels like death to someone who equates movement with worth. But clarity only shows up in stillness, not in comparison or any form of hustle. And the part that requires real honesty, sometimes you don't feel aligned because you haven't committed fully yet. But sometimes you haven't committed fully because deep down you know it's not yours. And that's a brutal loop. And the only way out of it is self awareness that isn't emotional or dramatic, just very observant. You look at your energy patterns. You look at what you naturally think about. You look at what you return to without force. Not what sounds impressive, not what looks scalable, what feels native to you, what feels innate to you. And that word matters. Native. What feels like it comes from you instead of something you're trying to attach to yourself. That's exactly where alignment starts, with recognition. And I don't think that the answer to misalignment is to burn everything down. That's the other extreme. You have a realization, you feel off for a week, and suddenly you want to pivot your whole life overnight. And that's not clarity at all, or like recognition of misalignment. That's just like straight up reaction. But real clarity is slower. Okay, it's not loud, it doesn't announce itself. It feels more like this quiet sentence forming in the back of your mind. Maybe this isn't exactly it. And instead of arguing with that sentence, instead of drowning it out with productivity or doubling down just to prove something to yourself, you sit with it. You don't have to quit today. You don't have to rebrand your own identity. You don't have to make an announcement to everybody. You just start observing yourself. You start noticing where your energy goes when nobody is asking anything from you. You start you notice what you think about when you're not trying to perform for other people, what you research without forcing it, what kind of conversations light you up without you having to act interested. And you compare that to the thing that you're currently doing or building or aligned towards, and don't do it emotionally, but logically, you ask, when I picture myself doing this for 5 years, then how does that feel in my body? Tight? Do you feel neutral? Do you feel steady? Do you feel excited? You know, if this got hard, really, really hard, would I still respect myself for staying in it? If this succeeded beyond expectation, would I actually feel proud or just relieved? And that relieved is super important because relief and pride are different. Relief means, thank God this worked or thank God this is over. But pride means like, yeah, that was me. This is me. I'm proud of this. And if your vision of success feels like relief more than pride, that is data you need to understand. And information isn't an emergency, it's just data, right? This is where maturity comes in because alignment isn't about chasing whatever feels good this week. It's about understanding your nature deeply enough that you stop trying to force yourself into shapes that don't match. Some people are just naturally builders. Some are naturally teachers. Some are analysts. Some are connectors. Some are artists who try to live like operators and they wonder why they feel drained. Some are operators who try to live like creators and they wonder why they feel restless. You can learn skills outside your nature. You can even master them. But long-term fulfillment tends to sit where skill and nature overlap. And nature is something that you discover. You don't invent that. Okay? You discover it by paying attention to patterns. Patterns in your curiosity, in your energy, in what you return to when you're not being watched, when you have nothing else, right? The mistake most people make is trying to decide their entire life from a singular emotional spike. That's not thinking. Thinking is patient. Thinking allows for complexity. You can be grateful for what something taught you and still realize it's not your long-term lane. Okay? You can acknowledge that something works and still admit that it doesn't fully fit. That doesn't make you weak. It just makes you self-aware. And self-awareness is expensive. It costs your ego. It costs the image that you've built of yourself. It costs the comfort of saying, this is who I am, when, at this point, you might not be fully sure anymore. But here's the more subtle truth. It is better to redirect early than to wake up 10 years into something that was never yours. And that doesn't mean that you stop moving. It means that you move with intention instead of fear. Okay? Stop asking how do I keep up? How do I stop feeling behind? And start asking yourself what is actually native to me? Like, who am I? What do I like? What do I naturally gravitate towards? And those questions don't have fast answers. They unfold. And honestly, maybe that's the point. Maybe purpose isn't something that you pick in a rush. Maybe it's something you recognize slowly once you stop trying to go so fast. And if you're in that space right now where something technically works, but it feels slightly off, you don't need to panic. Okay, just think in a super steady way because, sometimes the most powerful shift isn't a loud pivot that you might want to do. Rather, it's a quiet realization that changes how you move from here on out. So, I I've thought about this and I wanted to help a lot of other people with this, and I hope this episode has helped you. Um, I know a lot of people my age in their earlier 20s are struggling with this and can struggle with this, especially ambitious people. So um, I thought I'd give my 2 cents because I think, it's super important and not a lot of people actually get to know themselves. So if you've made it this far into the episode, I just want to thank you again for listening to my podcast and them fully. If you haven't followed the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, follow the podcast. You'll get notifications every single Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern when we upload a new episode. So if you haven't followed me on my socials, follow me at the Dylan Phipps, TheDylanPhipps, on all platforms, TikTok and Instagram, maybe even Twitter because I'm getting on Twitter. I don't know if I'll post a lot on there, but still follow me on there. And yeah, I'll be getting back to posting on TikTok here. I want to do it probably this month in March. I'm gonna return this March. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. And yeah, just keep my last note, my last piece of advice for you would just be to keep discovering who you are, because growth in life is just an endless self discovery process. So yeah, we'll see you guys next week for episode 21.